Hey, this is Seth with DroneDJ, and I'm excited to introduce to you the Mavic Air 2. We just got our package this week, and we've had a couple days to take a look at it, and I think a lot of you out there are going to be really excited about what DJI has brought to the table. So let's take a look at it. If you look around here, I've got it assembled. It's pretty quick out of the box. You just basically pop in the battery and put on the propellers. It's a, let me see, I want to say 570 gram product. So it's bigger than the previous Air by quite a bit. It's kind of in the midpoint between the previous Air and the Mavic 2 Pro. You want to take a look around. We'll take the battery out here quick. Same kind of charging idea as before. You can charge it either by the adapter that came with the Mavic 2, same kind of adapter, or via USB-C on the drone. USB-C and the so USB-C is the same place it is on the Mavic 2 Pro. And of course you have the SD card, same idea on the side. One thing I don't particularly like about this design is you don't really have access to the card or the slots while the drone is folded up. So you fold it up and all of a sudden you don't have access to it. Little nitpick there, not a big deal. If you're pulling videos off of this thing, sometimes it's nice to just be able to plug in. So let me fold this up, show you what kind of package we have. It is quite small, obviously, compared to the Mavic 2, which I can show you right here. So this is kind of a comparison. It's I would say about a third smaller. You'll see specs wise, it weighs quite a bit less. The propellers look almost the same, but they're not the same. Same quiet tips, but they're not interchangeable, which turns out to be a problem for me in particular, because I have both of these drones now. So folded up, you'll notice you've got quite a package size difference here. If you're putting something in your laptop bag, or your, you could almost put this in a purse or a European carry-all. It's about the same height, maybe like an inch, or sorry, less than an inch difference in height, but considerably shorter, considerably, I want to say a little narrower, and significantly lighter. And obviously with the smaller size, we can also take a look at the battery size difference here. So let's pull these out. So that's the Mavic Air battery versus the Mavic Air 2 battery versus the Mavic 2 Pro battery. Quite a big difference, weight-wise specifically, and you can see size-wise. What's frustrating is they probably could have used the same adapter to charge both of these things, but they didn't. It's slightly different. So if you're a person that has both of these or is upgrading from one to the other, they're not interchangeable. So bummer there, but not a big deal. I think most people are probably going to have one or the other. So the big difference in these, what most people are thinking about, obviously flight dynamics are important. And for the most part, the Mavic Air 2 is very similar to the Pro. There are some subtle differences. One of the big differences is obviously the upward sensor. So you can see the Mavic Pro has a sensor. Sorry, the Mavic 2 has a sensor here, and there's no sensor on the Mavic Air 2, which may have prevented an accident I had, but we'll never know. The underside is pretty similar. You've got the same LEDs, cameras. They're about the same amount. I want to say the same size. There's two LEDs on the Pro 2 Pro, so maybe a little bit brighter there. As far as the cameras, I know this black camera on the Air isn't showing up too well. So let's take a look at it. Size-wise, it's pretty significantly smaller, and that's what's interesting because here, I'm going to take myself off here, and we'll look specifically at these guys. So you're seeing that this is, I think, a 1-inch sensor, and this is a 1/2-inch sensor, and that's going to be a big difference in the amount of light that's brought in. That said, this is f2.8 versus f2.0, but the raw specs on this camera sensor are quite a bit better. For video, you have what everybody cares about is 60 frames per second at 4K, versus the big brother who has 30 frames per second at 4K. That's a big deal. I think a lot of people are making drone videos, and 4K 60 frames per second is kind of the baseline that they want to go to. So the fact that the Mavic 2 can't do 60 frames per second kind of, I don't know, it kind of draws a line in the sand, because I think drone photography videos are probably the #1 thing people do, and you kind of want to go up as high as you can. The fact that this little guy can do 60 frames and the big one can't, that's going to draw a line in the sand for a lot of people. And then as far as stills, the Hasselblad does 20 megapixel, and the Air 2 advertises 48 megapixels. And that's with some buyer trickery. I think the native is 12 megapixels, but with testing that I've done, the photography is great. I would put them pretty neck and neck. So, the question remains to be answered is like, why would somebody buy a Mavic 2 Pro at this point? You've got a very similar camera. You've got very similar specs in terms of flight time. The 2 Pro will stay up a little bit longer with that much bigger battery. But, the Air 2 is more portable, better camera specs, obviously lighter, and way cheaper, half price. So it's hard for me to imagine somebody buying a Mavic 2 Pro. In fact, the people who have a Mavic 2 Pro may be thinking to themselves, what the heck? Why did I get this when this much better package came along? And I don't want to say that. Let me see if we can get the focus happening here. But I don't know what DJI has planned. I've heard some rumblings that a Mavic 3 is in the pipeline, and don't trust my word for it, but my understanding is that suppliers are kind of preparing for a Mavic 3 to follow up, and that will obviously have the spec, at least 60 frames per second. It's 4K, and I'm sure it'll have a much better sensor. Maybe it'll even have the 686 Sony sensor that just got released recently. So that's kind of the comparison of these two guys, and you can, I'll flip these around a couple times for you to see if we can get the labels on there with the Mavic 2 and the Mavic Air 2. That's not helping anybody upside down. All right, so what else do we have to talk about? We have the controller. So let's compare these two controllers. The Mavic 2, you'd think it'd be like this, but no, it's upside down. the phone actually fits in the bottom, and I've been using iPhones for this, so we have a lightning connector. And the antennas are of course external, and it has a display, and it's relatively small. It's actually kind of a good size. I think a lot of people were not happy with the phone being on the bottom, the big display basically on the bottom. And that's kind of where this new design comes in. So there's no antennas externally, unless these guys, this is an antenna part. No, I think the antennas are actually in the back. They simplified the buttons. So instead of having a video record here and a still shutter here, you've got both in one button on the right side. And then you've got your camera angle there. And then, I mean, the front is pretty similar and very standard. You've got basically your normal tripod in sport mode. You got your, basically call back home button in case, your phone dies or whatever. And then you have power button and 4 light indicator, whereas you had a lot more information on the Mavic 2 Pro's really capable remote controller. So I think you have like up to 12 hours of time on this, which is nice on the Airs controller. And then you've got OcuSync, so you got 10 kilometers of range, which really is kind of nuts when you think about a $799 drone. Being able to go 10 kilometers. So other stuff on here, we've got it's USB-C. So when you charge this thing, you're charging with the same USB-C that you can plug into the actual drone, instead of I think this is micro USB here, which didn't make a lot of sense. There's no Bluetooth out here, unless you think about the USB-C here. And I think that's about it. So let me go down some of the specs. We've talked about the camera of the drone. Let me put these back up here. Let's see if we can do this. We've talked about the camera, and that's kind of where this Mavic Air 2 kind of separates itself. It's got a 1/2-inch camera sensor. That's the Sony IMX 586 on a 3-axis gimbal, just like the Mavic 2, but better than, for instance, let's take a look at another similar. So this is a Spark, a little Spark, and you'll see that, like, size-wise, the Spark doesn't have retractable wings. The Air can almost fit in the kind of the same volume as a Spark. Obviously, it's heavier and taller and whatnot, but it's just impressive how small it folds up, and you get a pretty amazing drone popping out of, like, I guess if you had some pretty loose cargo pants, you could probably put it in your pocket. Again, 60 frames per second, 120 megabits of throughput, which is bigger than the Big Brother, which is, kind of controversial, I think, if you're a Mavic 2 owner like myself. Images can be saved in RAW, JPEG, RAW plus JPEG. Smart Photo, pilots can choose this feature and use advanced scene recognition technology. Mavic Air 2 will optimize the camera settings and automatically choose one of the 3 modes to apply. General scene recognition, including grass, trees, sunset, snow, or hyperlight for low light scenes where the camera takes several images, varying exposure, and merges them for a high quality image with low noise or an HDR image. 48 megapixel mode is not available using Smart Photo, so it's kind of doing the same thing manually. 8K hyperlapse is something interesting. Mavic Air 2 is the first drone to feature 8K hyperlapse for stunning footage to share with the world, but the 8K and 1080p hyperlapse will be available at launch, with additional resolutions coming via firmware update. When shooting in 8K, only free and waypoints mode can be selected. So that's kind of interesting. At the gate, there's some updates coming that will improve the functionality. And HDR is a big thing here as well, and that obviously comes from that smartphone sensor that we have here. HDR video, HDR panorama, HDR video max resolution is 4K at 30 frames per second. So that's important to note. You can't do 4K 60 frames per second HDR video. So that sounds like a throughput issue to me. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, and they don't say that there's an upgrade for this. So that might be hitting that ceiling of 12 megapixels. Sorry, 120 megabits per second. So we talked about the battery. It's a lot lighter, but DJI eked 34 minutes of flight time out of it, which is impressive, like really impressive. You know, we're looking at a much smaller drone here, and a much smaller battery, and keeping it up for 34 minutes is impressive. It's not quite as long as the Mavic 2, but it's pretty close. And you know, the way drones are designed, longer flight times are achieved when the drone is in motion versus hovering. So it's not going to hover there for 34 minutes. It'll actually fly longer if it's moving forward or back or whatever. And they achieve this by a better aerodynamic design, and obviously it's more like the Mavic 2, but also new motors, ESCs, etc. One thing that's kind of exciting about the Mavic Air 2 is the APAS, or obstacle avoidance. The Air 2 features the latest and most advanced autonomous flying from DJI. So maybe this is going to go into Skydio territory in terms of tracking and avoidance and mapping technology. APAS 3 uses new mapping technology and flight path algorithms for ultra smooth transitions around, under, or over objects in the drone's path. APAS is automatically on when flying in normal mode, so you don't have to turn it on, it's just there. Pilots can turn off APAS in the settings. The max resolution when using APAS is 4K 30 frames per second. So again, you're not going to hit that 60 frames per second with this mode on. I'm assuming this is a bandwidth thing as well. You know, it's pulling in information from the camera probably every other frame, so it needs that info. And the APAS will turn off when recording at higher frame rates. So that's important to know. If you're recording at 60 frames per second, your APAS obstacle avoidance will turn off. So let's talk about focus track. So I'll just kind of read down the specs here. Pilots can choose from 3 new modes to capture cinematic footage with a subject locked in the frame. To activate focus track, put on the Mavic Air 2 video. So since I'm reading some of this here, Active Track 3. So again, we're talking about max resolution of 30 frames per second with Active Track. Active Track 3, pilots can select a subject for Mavic Air 2 to automatically follow, helping operators easily record compelling content. The third iteration, the updated Active Track features, uses state-of-the-art mapping technology and new flight path algorithms to offer improved subject recognition, obstacle avoidance, along with the ability to quickly re-engage the subject if temporarily moves behind an object. 4K 30 frames per second is the max resolution when using Active Track. So that's important. You know, all these new tricks that this drone doesn't work in 60 frames per second. So, you know, all these things are cool, but you're not going to get like a follow me in 60 frames per second, which a little bit controversial there, and probably something that the Mavic 2 or Mavic 3 will have. Point of interest 3.0, another focus track feature. Set an automated flight path around a specific subject. The updated iteration improves surface recognition, which can sometimes interfere with the center tracking and the ability to dynamically track subjects like people, vehicles, and more. So that's a lot of fun. Obviously, you know, if you're at the Grand Canyon and you want to circle around you, this is an improved version of that. Again, the lower frame rate. And then Spotlight 2.0, found in professional DJI drones like Inspire 2, Spotlight locks the subject in the frame while the user has free operation of the drone's movement. So basically, you lock the subject matter in, and then the drone pilot can zoom in and out, up and down, all around on their own, and the camera stays locked in on the subject matter, which is pretty cool. So let's talk about the range again. We talked a little bit about it with OcuSync 2. So that's perhaps why this is such a big controller here. With the OcuSync 2, you get a 10 kilometer transmission range. And in my testing, we got probably 5 kilometers out pretty quickly. And the transmission was fantastic. It felt like, it was right there. The only thing I did notice was a lag. So, you turn right or turn left, and then, in the video, you turn right or turn left. So, as you get further and further out, it's a longer and longer time period between sending back and forth video. Obviously, 10 kilometers with speed of light isn't a huge gap, but I did notice a lag as the thing flew further away. So let me just read. DJI's proprietary OcuSync 2 transmission technology delivers an extremely reliable HD video feed from the drone at a max distance of 10 kilometers. I didn't stretch it to 10 kilometers. We will have time to do that later on. OcuSync 2 supports both 2.4 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz frequency bands and uses auto switching feature to move between the two based on signal strength, while anti-interference technology blocks unwanted signals to keep the video feed clear. Pilots should always check rules and regulations in the region they are operating in before flying. Pilots should always keep their drone within that line of sight, obviously. So we have a new kind of news is there's a new DJI Fly app. So there's been some, DJI's released a bunch of apps, and this is going to be yet another one. So DJI Fly, the new Fly app offers simple and intuitive user experience, enabling you to capture cinematic shots easily. It features creator templates and beginner's flying coach, a feature that guides new users the basics they need to get started quickly and safely. I've been using a version of that. There's little things that, for the most part, it's the same. If you're used to the DJI 4 app, this will make sense. I mean, there's little things like when you take off, you just press the button down instead of sliding. Just all kinds of little things like that instantly will make sense. There's a lot of good user interface stuff here. So updated remote controller. So we talked about this guy. The new ergonomic remote controller design offers well-balanced feel and now mounts the phone on top of the controller. Note that iOS Lightning wire is already connected to the device. There's also a robust speaker on the back, also projects messages clearly to the operator. The new spring-loaded phone mount on top of the controller provides a clear line of sight to the mobile device. That's interesting. While core buttons such as switching between flight modes, custom buttons are easy to access. So I guess that's the thought process there. You're looking, basically, you're not looking, you can look up at the device easier if the thing's on top, I guess. That's what we're saying. AirSense. So Mavic Air 2 is also DJI's first consumer drone designed to include AirSense technology, which provides enhanced safety by warning drone operators of other aircraft nearby. AirSense receives signals called ADS-B from airplanes and helicopters and displays their locations on the controller screen. The coronavirus pandemic has created some supply chain issues. As a result, AirSense and the Mavic Air 2 will initially only be available in North America. Lucky us, where officials have implemented the strongest regulations, while a version without AirSense will be sold in all other regions, where ADS-B requirements for helicopters and planes were less strict. Due to the pandemic, North America will receive Mavic Air 2 with AirSense first. So that's interesting. I'm not sure if it's going to, like, AirSense, I think it's a hardware component that they're talking about. And it sounds like the Air 2s that are sold outside of the US will not have this hardware, and I don't know if there's an upgrade path. So, maybe going out in the black market, and getting yourself one flown in from North America might be cool if you really need that AirSense technology. Yeah, we'll have links for the North American one if you wanna try to send them overseas. That also may be why we saw some leaks from China, and they were slightly less expensive there. So maybe that's why the Air 2 is cheaper overseas from the U.S. Mavic Air 2 also uses obstacle sensors on the front, rear, and bottom. Notice it didn't say top, to let pilots know when they are too close to an object. An auxiliary light has also been added. So yeah, we're looking at this stuff. Let's see what else to think about here. So let's just talk about the specs a little bit. The weight, as I said before, is 570 grams. That's somewhere in between the previous Air, which I wish I had a version of, but I was kind of using the Spark for little dingy stuff and the Mavic 2, so I didn't really have a need for an Air. The size is 180 millimeters by 97 millimeters by 84 millimeters. And unfolded, that's 183 by 253 by 77 millimeters. As far as speed, in sport mode, 4 meters per second, and these are all in meters per second. Max descent speed 3 meters per second, or 5 meters per second with S mode during a sharp descent. The max service ceiling above sea level is 5,000 meters, pretty big for something this size. Max flight time without wind 34 minutes. Max hover time without wind 33 minutes. Max flight distance 18.5 kilometers. So basically, your 10-kilometer range, you're gonna use that up pretty quick, and you have 8.5 more kilometers to mess with. Max horizontal flight speed is 19 meters per second. In S mode, 12 meters per second in N mode, 5 meters per second in T mode. Max wind resistance is 8.5 to 10.5 meters per second in level 5. I'm not going to go through all these. Operating temperatures are pretty normal. 10 degrees below to 40 degrees Celsius, or 14 to 104 degrees. Actually, 14 degrees Fahrenheit on the low end is a little bit high. I know I've flown below that. The propellers are quick release. The low noise folding, just like the Mavic 2s. They're remarkably similar, as you can see. Let me see, can we get a closer look here? And they pop out just the same. I don't want to do that now, but they're the same mechanism, and I always have problems popping these guys out. So they come out easily, and they pop back in pretty easily as well. Satellite systems are GPS plus GLONASS. Compass, single compass. Internal storage 8 gigabytes. Battery capacity 3,500 milliamp hours at 11.55 volts. And it's a LiPo battery, which yields 40.42 watt hours. And the battery alone is 198 grams. So you're talking about 40% of the drone's weight is in the battery. So some camera specs that we've kind of already talked about: half-inch CMOS, 12 megapixels effective pixels, 48 megapixel with the Bayer thing. The lens is an 84 degree aperture, f2.8, focus range 1 meter to infinity, and focal length 44 millimeters. Let's see, what else are we talking here? The max resolution 48 megapixels is 8,000 by 6,000. And there's a bunch of different photo modes. You can do burst 12 megapixel at 357 frames. Singles 12 megapixel effective, but 48 megapixel. And the 12 megapixel, real sensor is lower than the Mavic 2s, which is 20 megapixels with the Hasselblad system there. And obviously there's no optical zoom like there is on the Mavic 2 zoom, which was 2 by zoom. I'm trying to think. HDR panorama. We got some specs there. You know, its photo formats are JPEG and DNG RAW. Video resolution 3840 is Ultra HD by 2160. Color profiles, decinematic normal, video formats. Gimbal 3-axis, tilt, roll, pan. Tilt 135 degrees to 45 degrees, roll negative 45 degrees to 45 degrees, and pan negative 100 to 100. Controllable range, negative 90 to 0 and negative 90 to 24 extended. I just don't want to read off all these kind of low-level stuff. Transmission is OcuSync with 2.4 to 5.8 gigahertz auto switching. Oh, so this is interesting. The max transmission distance is 10 kilometers FCC, but only 6 kilometers CE and 6 kilometers SRRC and MIC. So the FCC has given this clearance for 10 kilometers, but I think Europe and China and others are only going 6 kilometers. So that's an important differentiation. Live view quality is 720 at 30 frames per second or 1080 at 30 frames per second. We're using H.265, as you might know. Bitrate 12 megabits per second. Remote controllers OcuSync 2. All right, so that's pretty much the specs. So let's wrap it up here. So super impressed with this thing. Like, you know, very hard to complain about anything. You know, my complaints are few. You know, the location of the USB port on this, for instance, like I can't get at it when it's folded, and I can't, you know, plug in without having to unfold it. I guess that's something. You know, the $799 price is pretty incredible when you consider that the thing that is sitting next to it is a $1,500 object. So, and I don't know how long that'll last. I can't imagine people will be buying these for that much more money soon. But yeah, like if you're on the fence, so let's think about this. You're on the fence about buying a Mavic Air a couple months ago, and you're like, well, I don't know about the specs and the price. You know, I think it was originally at $900. This is like a no-brainer. Like, why in the heck wouldn't you pick this up for $799? It's got like almost in every single way better specs. It looks better. It's quieter. It flies longer. Like, there's just nothing that this one doesn't improve upon. But the question is, like, why are you going to buy a Mavic 2 Pro at this point? Like, you know, obviously the sensor is bigger. You're going to get probably better looking stills, even though you're not going to get the 48 frames per second. When you absolutely need 4K at 60 frames per second, the Air 2 will deliver it. The original Air won't. So that's a big thing. Like, I think a lot of people are in drones for the 4K photography. I think, you know, the 2 Pro controller is a little nicer. But I do like the fact that in my limited flight time, I do enjoy having the screen above. You know, I'm not looking below my hands. So that's an improvement. So, you know, if you were possibly in the 2 Pro or even the 2 Zoom, you're thinking about buying one of those two products, the Mavic Air is also really tempting, because not only do you get most of the same features, most of the flight time, uh, 10-kilometer range, lots of maneuverability, speed, but you get it at half the price, like $799 versus $1,500 here. It's like not even a question for me. And this is way more portable. It's got better flight technologies, better follow technology. Like I kind of feel bad for the pro owners like myself who are at this point like have an inferior product. It feels like, but for pretty much everybody else out there who wants to spend under $1,000 for a drone, the Air 2 is a no brainer. Like it does everything you could possibly want. It's got it's good looking. It's got plenty of range. Got plenty of and obviously there's going to be lots of accessories for this. One accessory I'm looking forward to is you can't put a iPad on this thing, right? Like it's not going to fit. So and I've seen tons of people out there flying their drones with iPads. So one accessory I'm looking forward to there is getting an iPad on this thing. I don't know how that would handle, but wrapping up, Mavic Air 2 is an amazing, amazing drone for the price. Amazing drone even for much more than the price. And flying it is a ton of fun. It's got it takes everything like the 4K, the 48 megapixel stills. It's hard to imagine what you would want, what else you would want in a product right now. So that's kind of it. Remember to subscribe to DroneDJ here. We're going to put up a lot more videos on the Mavic Air 2 and other drones, and we'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. Thank you. Here's a little bit of aerial photography from the Mavic Air 2. We're just going up and in at 60 frames per second, 4K. You notice how quick the drone flies. It can get up in the air pretty quick. It can now circle and pan. It's just a lot of fun to use, and obviously the video is great.